think Aristotle. I just did another video. I'm completely lost. Bear with me. Okay, so we did our Plato video. That took forever. Aristotle's definitely going to be a little more succinct and to the point. Let's see here. So again, we're using our paper 1 notes for political science 3, philosophy 3, introduction to theory. Again, if you don't know my name, I'm Danny. So hopefully we all know that and you've seen my face and have actually been able to go to class. And I'll be posting these on the YouTube into class. And so like and subscribe so I can become YouTube famous. I can be one of the Paul brothers. Okay. So here we have a picture of Aristotle. You know, it's a Roman copy of some Greek bust. So we have here again, Aristotle was the student of Plato. Aristotle in this work, again, if there's typos, I apologize. And this work is often considering different forms of government. So monarchy. So he definitely kind of goes through this kind of like ideal form and non-ideal form. Or he does definitely build off the Plato, the ones that are for the common interest and the ones that are for the self-interest of the ruler, right? So you have the monarchy versus tyranny, like a one-person rule. The monarchy is kind of the virtuous. The tyranny is the negative or the vice kind of rule. Then we have the aristocracy, ruled by the best. That's the more virtuous one. So it's ruled by the few, but they're like the best, right? Whereas oligarchy is just kind of ruled by the few who are self-serving. So these people, like, say, serve the states. Kind of like the Roman state would probably be like an aristocracy, the Roman Republic. The constitutional government, which he talks about, versus a democracy. So a theme, too, that will come up throughout this class, which, you know, I would tend to agree with, is that we should all be very dubious of democracy. Rousseau's, I mean, pretty much everyone's going to be dubious of democracy. So that's a good lesson to take, especially if you're very politically active. Again, I think the kind of rhetoric we're hearing right now is, oh, democracy, it's so great. And again, we're a liberal democratic republic in the United States, so we have checks and balances on the tyranny of the majority. If none of this is making sense, these are perfect questions to be asking me in our Zoom sessions, right? So again, I would love to debate someone who thinks democracy is the bee's knees, because I will defeat you on the field of intellectual battle and show you how silly you are, or you'll totally change my mind, and you know, I will let you teach the rest of the class. That'd be sweet. I'll click the paycheck, you teach the class. So the difference here lies in the form, is whether the form is just or the form of government. So additionally, let's see here. Additionally, the ancient Greek idea. Oh, so this comes up a lot in the readings as well. So again, you can tell these kind of intros are for you, but they also help me kind of remember what the hell I read. This idea of telos is not mentioned in this, but if you were to take a different, say, philosophy class, I know one student said, you know, I'm taking all philosophy classes. This is this idea of an end or an objective or a goal. I don't know. It's one of these things, like it just, if it clicks. I think it makes sense, but again, this kind of term took me a long time to understand. So like, just think of an objective, like what's a society trying to do? What is the end? And so for Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, people had a telos, people had an end, and not just things in themselves, right? So like the kind of simple one that might be used, I think I might say it here somewhere, is like a horse. A horse isn't supposed to bark like a dog. It's supposed to do things that horses do: run in a field, eat hay, be in a herd. And so that's part of its end or its goal, or what it is to be a horse. And so very much like that, humans have that. It's not in this reading, but famously Aristotle said that humans were, probably this is the Latin translation, homo politicus. So humans are political animals. Maybe some of you have heard that before. Aristotle was the one that said that. And what he meant by that is that human beings are meant to live in a society, talk about things, and through that discussion and kind of analysis, come to the truth about the society. And we kind of do this to an extent, but again, the Greek idea is a little bit, more anachronistic, more in the past. But it makes sense, because one of the most difficult things that we have in society are these things called norms. And as much as people want to look at voting outcomes or how things are opposed to be, there is no rules. We make up these rules. This is not quite like the far left kind of discussion of social construction. It just means to what extent do we value things, right? So America can change its mind, and how do we know? Because we kind of go through what we would call a democratic process to say we want more immigrants, we want less immigrants. We want to go to war with that country, we want peace with this country. These things change over time, right? So that's a perfect example. Our relationship with China is changing right now. because of the way they've behaved and because of the way we've behaved. And so politics is not a static thing. It's very fluid, and you kind of keep up with that change by engaging with your neighbors, talking with them, doing this kind of very human activity of what makes the best community. So these themes are timeless because as much as their examples are different, I would argue humans as a species have not changed. The human condition is the same, and that's why these ancient thinkers are still so relevant. So again, one of the things that when I'm talking to my parents and this election coming up that I really take solace in is that all these problems are the same problems that they had 2,000 years ago. I know people don't think like that, but once we do these readings, you go, man, like, it's not just Democrats and Republicans. Like, the ancient Greeks couldn't figure this stuff out. The ancient Chinese couldn't figure this stuff out. So that's 10,000 years ago in many cases. And so that makes me feel better, actually. I guess it's sad we haven't made much progress, but it means that it's nothing special to the United States. There's nothing particularly malevolent or a gross failure on behalf of this country, this culture, and the values that we have in this particular part of the world, in this time and place. I'm pontificating, I apologize. So again, Aristotle begins by asking, what is a state? So again, we kind of had this theme of legitimacy, coercive power, agreements, which will definitely come back more with the contract theorists. But what is a state? What is a community? What does it mean to live in a society with other people, right? There's different definitions of this. And so this is his investigation in a very kind of scientific way. So again, much of the way we think about science in the Western world, this guy is probably the most important figure in the Western tradition in many different ways. Even our authors like Rousseau and Marx are just redoing Aristotle. And so modern science, he was not a modern scientist, but its roots go back to Aristotle. And you get that even from this reading, so kind of tearing things apart, thinking about what's the best way of understanding them. So in some sense, it's a society or a state is a composite of citizens. He moves to consider who are citizens then, right? If it's just people living together in a place. And this will differ on the type of state in which they reside. So again, one of the great things about this reading is that Aristotle's very sensitive, much like the different kind of definitions from Plato, that context, intention matter, right? So context is the reality on the ground, and intention is what's the purpose behind, say, an action, right? Plato is very much, in the Socrates dialogue, was very much concerned with say, what's the intention behind this action, right? Oh, governments for the strongest from thrashing Marcus, right? But at the point for Socrates is well, the intention is that it might be for yourself, but you're going to have to care about other people. You're going to have to care about the common interest. And so your intention does then matter, right? Puts the appropriate end or goal in accordance with their nature. So how is society supposed to be? So again, one of the things that you should probably push back against, and if you've been living in the United States for any amount of time, really the modern world, is that there is, I wouldn't call it a caste system per se, but there's much more a role you're supposed to do. And one of the things I think we have in the modern world that Aristotle would disagree with is you choose what you do. You change your mind. I used to work at UPS. I didn't like it, so I was I'll go back to school. But that's not the way Aristotle's thinking about it. People have the role. Fishermen, fisherwomen are supposed to be fisher people. Horsemen, or, same thing. That's what they do, and you can see how people would follow, say, in the footsteps of their family, right? So then the rich elite who make political decisions, they're the ones that are supposed to do that, not the regular mud people that work on the docks and work in the farms, right? Because we don't know about the kind of esoteric deliberations it requires to run, say, a big city, right? Who has the power to take part in deliberative and judicial administration of any state is said by us to be a citizen of that state. And speaking generally, a state is a body of citizens sufficing for those purposes of life. So in the same way, we don't want, say, a Japanese or German traveler who's vacationing in the United States to have a say in what we have to do. You clearly want someone to live in a place if they're going to make decisions about that place. Again, what is a state? Usually thought of even today as a defined border with a permanent set of people. Aristotle shows that there are exceptions to this, right? So again, we know that there are expatriates. Americans can live all over the world. They're still American citizens. Soldiers are all over the world, but they still have a tie to a community in a particular place. Can a state be so large it comprises more than one nation? States change through time, but are still considered the same state. It does not depend on the government, right? So again, if the American government were to disappear, the American people would still exist. So clearly, a political community is not tied to a government, right? There's a lot of calls for getting rid of borders, which would mean you get rid of states. We're going to read an anarchist thinker, which is what that is, not having states. And you'd still have a country, I guess, but you wouldn't have a government or a state per se. Similarly, one citizen differs from another, but the salvation of the community is the common business of them all. This community is the Constitution. The virtue of the citizen must therefore be relative to the Constitution, which he or she is a member. So it's going to be kind of sexist too. I remember it's written 2,500 years ago. So we'll cut Aristotle some slack. Or not, do what you want. The good citizen ought to be capable of both. He or she should know how to govern like a free man and how to obey like a free man. These are the virtues of a citizen. So this is kind of system in which Aristotle is kind of developing. He recognizes that in order to be a good ruler, you have to know what it's like to be ruled. So you have to know the plight of the people. But at the same time, in order to be a good person, you kind of have to know what the ruler goes through. And so he thought people should rule and be ruled at the same time. This kind of idea of what a republic is gets echoed in, again, the Rousseau that we'll read later in the semester. Just highlights from the different sections of the reading. We cannot consider everyone a citizen. That is necessary for the state. So again, just because people participate in the state does not mean that they're going to be a citizen. Citizens are regarded with, say, the outcome of the country or the society as a whole. This probably isn't the best example, but it is relevant for people who live out in the Palm Desert area, right? So you might have like migrant workers. They might be citizens from another country, but they care about their country. They just happen to be working, say, in the United States, if that makes sense. So I think that's a fairly good example. So when you have people working in other places, it doesn't mean necessarily that they even care about the place they're in. They're just there for, say, work. And so that's why you can't, just because you even live in a place and work in a place is not why you're considered a citizen. So again, the citizen is going to care about the common interest of like that particular community. That's going to be tied to a particular place and time. So this leads kind of Aristotle in discussing essentially justice. So again, another theme for our paper. If we go back up to the top, what you should be thinking about as you're encountering these different readings. I don't know why it kind of shifted to the... Why is it doing that? Okay, I'm back in action here. According to Sophocles, at the right is like, what is justice? Is the just man happier? And there are particularly strengths. So again, you're going to want to pick at least two of these thinkers, which should be sufficient for a 600-word paper, and talk about like some of their definitions of justice, and then what's their conclusion with regards to happiness. Do they even talk about it? They all basically do, directly or indirectly. So I don't want. No, he doesn't talk about happiness. They do. Let's go back to our Aristotle. Again, I'm trying to keep these fairly short. We'll see how that works. Let's see where we're at. This part yields a clear discussion of justice. In part 6, Aristotle notes that the state is a community of free persons. As such, a state acts in accordance with the principles of justice when it acts in the common interest. So again, like in the Plato, whatever's in the common interest is going to be justice. Again, there's definitely pushback. We can talk about this in class. Like, just because the Nazis acted in a common interest, but I don't think we say that they were acted in accordance with justice. A cheap philosophical trick always is compare things to the Nazis, and then you really have to kind of scratch your head and go, oh, shit, I guess that's a bad example, right? So, I mean, that's the tactic Plato would have used, right, from our Socratic reading. So justice is not simply equality, which I would argue, and you guys can disagree, is still the case, right? Justice should not be destructive of the state, right? So in my other class, I guess the intro class, I know there's a few repeat customers, I often would say, even in the United States, as much as, again, we talk about equality, even you sitting in this class are not for equality or like equality across the board. You're interested in usually a certain kind of like social equality, where non-relevant factors do not inhibit you from attaining the best outcomes or optimal freedom. So the classic example would be something along the lines of not letting blind people drive, right? We're saying you do not have the freedom to drive. We're not going to treat you equally. You have hands, you can own a car, you can have feet, you could drive whatever, however you can drive this car, but it would not be safe for you to do so. So we're not going to treat you equally, right? And that's a perfect, right there at least. Well, why was that? Because it would be destructive. A blind person would run off the road and potentially kill people. Same thing with us in our grading and you getting jobs. You work hard, you build a resume, you get straight A's, you get this expertise. You don't want to go and try and be, say, a medical doctor at some hospital to get paid, lots of money, and then some, jabroni off the street with no credentials gets the job because you go, well, I have to treat everyone equally, and he or she was here first. You go, no, like, I went to this really good medical school. I went to Harvard, and I want to get the job but over this person because I'm better qualified, right? So, not appointing the best qualified people to positions who are going to do the best in those positions, right, would be destructive to the state. So again, we have this 2,000 kind of year-old wisdom here from Aristotle. And again, I would argue that's correct, and you're allowed to disagree with me. I want you to disagree with me, actually, even if it's just you're playing devil's advocate in class. That'd be great. I like playing. It's the best part of this job. I don't get enough money. I haven't eaten today. I'm hungry. The only benefit's getting to talk to you guys. So we have a quotation from section 11. Hopefully I'm getting these Roman numerals correctly. Laws, when good, should be supreme, and that the magistrate or magistrates should regulate those matters only on which laws are unable to speak with precision owing to the difficulty of any particular principle, embracing all particulars, right? So there's definitely this theme of rule of law in the readings, and so basically you always want to use rule of law. You don't want people to kind of haphazardly go like, well, I think this is right or this is wrong, because it's biased. People are biased. And so what Aristotle's saying is that only when there's kind of like these gaps in the law do you want these kind of experts to kind of fill in. And again, that's still going to be contentious, but that's really like what you want to relegate them to, right? So the particulars, how things are going to work, how much money you have to get collected to do things, right? This, I think, comes close to how we contemporarily think about regard to justice. Aristotle makes two successive points after he posits the above claim. First, what exactly is a good law, right? So he thinks good laws are associated with justice, right? And so good laws are going to have something to do with, say, the common interest. Second, what is considered, let me fix that. Sorry, typos, I knew it was going to happen. What is considered, save it, a good law will be contextual to the system of government in which it is a part, right? So that's where he goes through his forms of government. So again, the nuance matters, the framework of the society matters, and what justice is, right? So he's not giving us a solid definition as, say, in the same way Plato was it. But like his teacher Plato, he also wants to develop a more general, objective definition of justice and not a contextual or subjective one. So again, this kind of idea of, which is something that people have been arguing about right now, especially on social media, subjective experience matters. It's like, no, haven't you ever seen a magician? Subjective experience is the worst. Well, I felt a certain way. It's like, okay, we can use your experience about how you were treated by the police or something like that to inform the more objective data, right? But like, just because it could be the case, like, you're wrong about something, basically, right? So we need these kind of like better appeals to things. Again, you can disagree, but I think that makes sense to me. I don't know. The good is justice, in other words, the common interest. That goes back to our point from earlier. The section brings up equality and inequality. For Aristotle, inequality in itself is not a problem, right? Because you're supposed to fulfill your telos. And so obviously, like, the poor people, the workers are not going to be treated the same as the people ruling or making decisions. And that's okay, because everyone fulfilling their role is going to be the best for society. And again, I think that's something probably us in this modern time disagree with, which I also think is the correct position. Let's see. I know we're starting to run along here. He uses the example of the flute player. Yeah, so he's talking about essentially, merit-based benefits, right? So just because you're rich doesn't mean you would deserve, say, getting the best flute player would, because they can make the best use of it. So again, that idea of telos comes back. Whereas in the United States, though, we think if you have money, you should give yourself the opportunity, because oftentimes we don't know who the best is. I think that's where we disagree. You going to this college is a perfect example. In other countries, you have to pass exams, and basically the government says whether you're good enough to go to college. That's why there are so many foreign exchange students in this country, probably in this class at this school, right? If you don't, here it's like, well, I have the money, I want to do it. I know what's best for myself, right? Whereas you'll notice the Aristotelian view is not liberal. It's not about what's best for the individual. It's what's best for the community, right? It's like, well, we can't risk putting money on you. This person passed the test, they're a better bet to be better at that job and get the best education, right? So like the best flute player, as Aristotle is saying. Whereas in America, our general attitude is like, well, maybe I could be the best flute player if I had the opportunity. Give me, that's the way we think about equality now. This is kind of equality of opportunity, right? So actually, even though it sounds almost perverse, we are much more concerned with like the wealth, giving people the opportunity to determine what's best for them, and that may not be in the common interest. That's much more of an American kind of modern conception of the best society. Maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you're more of like this kind of ancient Republican. A Republican in this sense basically means like, what's best for the community. That's like a Republican style of government, whereas the U.S. is a liberal style of government. Most of the Western world has various forms of liberalism. Justice is a social virtue, right? So it's going to be the benefit of society. It's not going to be if you're acting justly, you're not going to be doing bad things. I don't know. Kings rule according to law over voluntary subjects, while the tyrant rules over involuntary. So again, we're going to hear these ideas again with the contract theorists, which is that the best societies are the ones that seem to be more legitimate. How do you know when they're legitimate? When people freely agree to them. The tyrant in this instance is going to have subjects that are involuntary. They're going to have to force people to follow. The Machiavelli that I just finished the notes on talks about this as well. When people willingly follow the leader, it's just much more stable because it's legitimate, right? Aristotle is pointing out that a just or legitimate system, which is the way we kind of think about these things, we might even make just and legitimate interchangeable words, is one in which the subjects, the people, agree to it willingly. So no one's pointing a gun at them. The law then is a set of principles which we could say are agreements. I'm not going to speed. I'm not going to steal. I'm not going to murder, right? We all kind of freely agree to those things. Mostly. Probably some of you speed. I think we all speed on occasion. We mostly follow that, right? Maybe drinking and driving is one we would all agree to even if we get caught doing it because we know it could cause harm. Citizens willingly follow. Tyrants force people to follow them, right? So that's just another really important theme of just this class. This idea of legitimacy. So what is a state? What is legitimate? All these kinds of things are really, really important to consider. And the rule of law, it is argued, is preferable to that of any individual, right? So we don't want individuals making arbitrary decisions, something subjective decisions from their perspectives. We want this kind of this more objective thing that we make. We know it's objective because we make it, right? So that's where the Constitution comes in. It's objective to the extent that it's written down and we can point to it. It's a real thing in the real world. So that's the objective. It's independent of people. Well, people made it, but now it's not dependent. It's not like an idea. It's ideas written on paper. I can see how these philosophical arguments could get around, especially if you're a very passionate, say, activist, contemporary activist kind of person with all this stuff going on. But I love it. I actually love having these arguments if you're having them in good faith. What else do I want to say about that? But say certain individuals govern, they should only guard as ministers. Yeah, so you just kind of want this kind of thing formulated objective from the people. So the people make it, but then it's independent. And what I wanted to say about that is like even with the case of the Constitution is that there's still all these gaps about what things mean. So you still end up arguing about like, well, okay, what was the meaning of that? Or times have changed, has the meaning of these things changed? So even producing what we'll call in parentheses, or quotation marks, objective, it's still kind of not. But that's still better than saying having one person just kind of on the top of their head go, yeah, it's legal. No, it's not legal. Why? Because I said so. Like, I said so is never going to be a good enough justification for things, at least for most people, unless, you just trust that person's judgment. So usually probably like, this is the kind of argument your parents give you, especially when you're a child. Don't touch that, don't do that. Why? Because I said so. Okay, that doesn't, but usually most of us probably think, okay, once I'm 18, that shit doesn't fly anymore, Mom. I don't want to clean my room. I don't care what you say. Or not, I don't know. The law is more impartial than people, as we're kind of discussing. It will be less biased, according to Aristotle. Again, I think that's still true, unless you're kind of just very much in kind of like systemic kind of arguments, which definitely have their weaknesses, but if you're partial to them, kind of systemic injustices, we can talk about that. The idea of the rule of law is something that is still considered a cornerstone in modern conceptions of justice, which is true. It is clear that Aristotle holds justice is that which is in the common interest, but the discussion of happiness is left for you to interpret and defend. So there isn't that clear discussion of what happiness is, but clearly like with the Plato, it's like, well, wouldn't these things create happiness? And that's what you would address in your paper. Or maybe, again, one of the things, too, I think when you read other types of philosophy, it's like, well, maybe when you're always acting justly, it just effing sucks. Like, it's just boring. Like, I can never do anything. Maybe there is happiness and fun in breaking the laws. Like I said, speeding or, kind of doing, jaywalking. I don't know, you exciting kids, whatever you do. Yeah, so again, there's going to, especially when we get to the middle, will be this difference between, say, maybe happiness and justice. But we know it's pretty clear in the Plato, to some extent. Socrates is like, well, I think it would create happiness, but we never actually came to a good definition of justice, so I don't actually know if it would create happiness. Is kind of what the Plato and the Socrates ended at. And we don't have much of a discussion of happiness in this particular reading, but he's talking about like the better outcomes, this telos, following like what you're meant to be doing if you believe in such a thing. And so I would say if you're doing that which would create the betterment of society and the thing you're meant to be doing, you would have to be happy. Like, wouldn't you? I don't know. Again, it's very different than the American happiness, as I mentioned earlier, because we think we get to choose what would make us happy, and then when we're wrong in our modern times, we can go do something else. That's usually what people are unhappy when they get stuck in a rut, right? Yeah, so this is great food for thought. I think this is the tenor I want to kind of have in our discussions, is the way I'm just approaching this, kind of thinking things out loud. That's the way I want you to do it. So go through this as best you can. I have to do the St. Augustine. I'll probably do that tomorrow and post that tomorrow. Yeah, so hopefully this is good food for thought. And email me questions, ask me questions in class. Again, I'm not going to lecture. This discussion's for you to listen to. Again, there's accessibility issues. I can go through this material again. Obviously I don't have the time to send this off for captioning or to do the captioning myself. But again, I'm mostly just going off of I just didn't highlight this time because my beautiful model face that as I'm becoming YouTube famous would be gone. And the only way people know it's me is if this is on the screen. So yeah, see you guys for the next video.